She used to be just the girl who wiped the board. But the night she placed an old phone inside a tissue box, an entire system of power began to crack. She was only 12. No protection, no guidance. Just a red notebook, a buried secret, and a courage strong enough to light up a school built on lies. And then, the truth stopped being silent. Subscribe now to follow every gripping, emotional, and unforgettable episode we bring to life. This journey is just beginning. When the school bell rang its last note each afternoon, the grounds of Park Hill Academy would slowly fade into quiet, its polished halls and manicured courtyards emptying of well-dressed children and their luxury SUVs. The hum of elite education would settle into silence, and the building would sleep under a veil of privilege. But in the margins of that silence, a small figure stirred. Emily's footsteps made no sound on the tile floors, though she knew every creak, every slight dip in the marble. At just 12 years old, she moved with the practiced grace of someone used to being invisible. She wasn't a student here. Not officially. Her name wasn't printed on attendance sheets or class rosters. She wore no crest-stitched blazer, no patent leather shoes. Her father was the night custodian, the man who swept the leaves before sunrise, who repaired the ancient plumbing in the girls' restrooms, who scraped gum from beneath the auditorium seats before the gala nights. And Emily was the girl who followed him. She was his shadow. Small, quiet, and unnoticed. As other children left behind science projects and debate trophies, Emily moved through the aftermath, bucket in hand, cloth over shoulder, erasing the day's equations and lectures with each pass of her sponge. One whiteboard at a time, she erased evidence of a life she wasn't allowed to live. In the beginning, she helped only out of boredom. Her father insisted she stay close during his shift, ever cautious of the darkness outside and the strange adults that sometimes lingered too long in empty parking lots. So, Emily stayed. But instead of playing with her tablet or napping on the old office couch, she wandered the empty classrooms. And that's when she discovered the books. History books, math workbooks, vocabulary tests left behind, paperbacks with notes scribbled in the margins. Once, she found a collection of short stories filled with sticky notes, a senior's prep for a literature final. Another time, she found an open laptop, battery dead but screen still faint with a poem that hadn't yet been submitted. Emily read them all. She read in the dark corners of the library with only the emergency exit sign casting a pale green light. She read beside the art room's kiln as it cooled from the day's work. She read while wiping down desks in the music room, the echo of pianos still clinging to the air. And when her father called for her, she hid her notebook quickly, stuffed with copied passages and equations she didn't yet fully understand. At home, or rather the two-room quarters beside the loading dock that served as their apartment, she would rewrite what she'd memorized that day. There were no internet passwords, no private tutors, no polished granite kitchen counters like the other students had. Just Emily, a pencil, and the stack of notebooks she kept hidden beneath her mattress. She never meant for anyone to know. To the rest of Park Hill, Emily wasn't anyone. She was that girl, if she was remembered at all. The staff knew her only as the man's daughter, quiet, polite, harmless. Students rarely saw her. Teachers, if they did catch a glimpse, assumed she was someone's sibling waiting for a late ride home. But Emily saw everything. She saw which teachers left in a hurry and who stayed late to grade. She noticed which classrooms had coffee stains on the windowsills and which ones smelled of forgotten lunches. She memorized the way certain students treated others when no adults were around. And perhaps most importantly, she noticed the small things. The subtle shifts in tone when someone spoke to the principal, the hesitation in laughter, the little lies buried in formal smiles. The school itself was a contradiction. Gothic arches, chandeliers, and Latin mottos carved above archways. Yet beneath the glittering surface were cracks that someone like Emily could slip through unnoticed. And that's how she found her place. Her father, a man of few words, had warned her from the start. "You're not one of them, Emmy. Don't forget that. Not everyone's nice just because they smile." His hands were worn from labor, knuckles permanently nicked from years of repairs. But his voice had never softened when speaking about the school. He respected the place, sure, but he didn't trust it. Emily didn't understand that at first. Not until she overheard snippets of conversation between teachers she admired. Conversations filled with passive judgments, with hushed remarks about scholarship kids not fitting in, or how those types lowered the standards. Those types, that's what she was, one of them. Yet the books never judged her. They welcomed her, page after page. They whispered to her in voices stronger than any morning announcements. So she kept reading. She read past her bedtime, past the squeaky hallway lights, past the echo of her father's heavy boots pacing back and forth in the workshop next door. The more she read, the more she began to understand the system. The way scholarships were awarded, how GPA rankings worked, how one administrator's approval could change a child's future. It was a quiet obsession, a hunger, one fed in stolen moments and dust-lit classrooms. Emily had found her world in the discarded corners of someone else's. And that world, as it turned out, was not as flawless as it appeared. One night, as the autumn wind howled across the parking lot and leaves blew in frantic circles around the main courtyard, Emily entered classroom 4B later than usual. Her father had been called away to fix a burst pipe in the basement, and she had time. Real time. The air inside smelled of vanilla markers and lemon cleaner. A single reading light still glowed near the whiteboard. And on the teacher's desk sat a folder, unlocked, open, and thick with grade printouts. She didn't mean to look, but one name caught her eye. Chloe J., 92.5 GPA, full academic scholarship recommendation. Emily paused. She knew Chloe. She'd seen her handwriting in the lit room, had once read a paper of hers on Of Mice and Men. It had been riddled with errors, spelling mistakes, broken metaphors. Emily, a girl who never even took the class, had mentally rewritten it by the time she'd reached the third paragraph. She moved closer. Another name. Marcus T., 94 GPA. No scholarship. Marcus was the boy she'd watched debate social reform with passion and precision in the school's annual speech contest. His paper had earned a standing ovation. And yet here, on this sheet, it was like he barely existed. A chill ran through her. The grades didn't match what she knew. And the names being recommended, they didn't match the talent. It was the first time Emily felt something twist inside her. Not just curiosity or longing, but injustice. Deep, silent, burning injustice. She closed the folder gently, rested her hand on the edge of the teacher's desk. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the windows like bones. Somewhere deep in her mind, a door opened, and Emily, the girl who had always lived in shadows, stepped one quiet breath closer to the light. Emily didn't have a room of her own, but she had a kingdom, one carved into margins, stacked in shadows, and stitched together with notebook paper and borrowed ink. Her library was a dented metal box beneath her cot, stuffed with spiral-bound journals, napkins filled with formulas, crumpled handouts, and flashcards she'd hand-copied in perfect silence. Her mind was a quiet furnace, burning through facts, questions, and observations far beyond her years. She wasn't just curious, she was hungry, starving for knowledge no one had ever thought to give her. Night, after wiping away fractions and sentence diagrams, Emily would gather forgotten worksheets and discarded notes, carefully selecting what she would study under the flickering light of the janitor's closet. When she found something worth keeping, an annotated poem, a complex algebra equation, a paragraph that made her feel something, she would write it down in her small red notebook, the one with the peeling corners and faint coffee stains. It was her secret world, a stitched-together curriculum stolen from the gaps between erasers and silence. Then came the night of the storm. Rain slammed against the tall glass windows of Park Hill Academy like 1,000 tiny fists. Thunder echoed through the rafters, making the chandeliers in the main hall tremble. Most of the teachers had left early, eager to beat the downpour. The hallways, usually humming with after-school clubs and soft jazz from the music wing, were unusually dead. Emily was alone. Her father was in the boiler room, battling a flooded pipeline. She had wandered into the faculty lounge, normally locked, but someone had forgotten to bolt it in their rush. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee, pine disinfectant, and wet carpet. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. On the long mahogany table sat a stack of ungraded tests, a half-eaten granola bar, and a manila folder left open just slightly. Enough to tempt fate. She wasn't trying to snoop. She told herself that. She was just cleaning, just tidying up, just peeking. The folder was labeled 11th grade, midterms. Her fingers, damp from the rain on her sleeves, trembled slightly as she turned the first page. It was a literature exam. The title scrawled in the upper right corner, The Tempest, Comparative Analysis. She recognized the name on the paper. Avery Dalton. Avery was the daughter of a local politician, always chauffeured in a black SUV with tinted windows. Emily had seen her scream at her driver once for being 2 minutes late. Emily had also found Avery's draft essays weeks before. Full of cliches, lacking insight, lazy grammar. But this exam, a perfect 98.5. Emily frowned. She flipped to the next sheet. Another student, Jessica Lee. Quiet. Always reading in the lunchroom. The one who'd helped a first grader find their lost backpack and left cookies in the library for the cleaning staff. Her test was marked with a 79. The margins had scribbles of brilliance. Thoughtful, original. Her thesis? Stunning. Emily read it twice, then again. This wasn't just good. It was better than Avery's. Much better. Something in her gut curled. She closed the folder slowly, as if it might explode. Her pulse beat loudly in her ears, even louder than the thunder shaking the roof. She turned to leave, and that's when she saw it. Another folder, lying open near the edge of the couch. This one wasn't filled with tests. It was a spreadsheet printed out in black and white. Names, GPA rankings, scholarship recommendations. A typed memo was paper-clipped to the front. Final adjustments before submission. Please verify totals. Emily didn't know what any of it meant. Not yet. But she saw the column marked Scholarship Priority and recognized the same names. Avery, Priority 1. Jessica, unlisted. Her eyes scanned the rest of the page, heart thudding with every line she read. Some students had stars next to their names. Others had bolded notations, donor recommendation, board connection, legacy family. There was a column labeled Subjective Potential. What did that mean? What did any of it mean? The room seemed to spin for a moment. She reached for the armrest of the chair beside her and sat down, notebook still clutched to her chest. Her fingers trembled as she took it out and flipped to a blank page. There, in tight, perfect handwriting, she copied what she remembered from the spreadsheet. Names, scores, strange codes beside them. She didn't know if it mattered. But something inside her told her not to forget. Emily wasn't sure what she had just seen, only that it didn't feel right. It felt designed, curated, twisted. Outside, the storm raged louder. A flash of lightning lit up the room in cold white light. Emily flinched, but kept writing. That night, lying in bed beneath the thin quilt her mother had sewn years ago, she couldn't sleep. The sound of dripping water in the hallway, the groan of old pipes, the faint scratch of branches against their single-pane window. None of it lulled her the way it usually did. Her mind replayed the test scores, the spreadsheet, the way Jessica's essay had been passed over for mediocrity dressed in privilege. She sat up, reached under her cot, pulled out her red notebook. She flipped to the page where she had copied the strange data. Beneath it, she wrote a single question. Why are the best students losing? She underlined it twice. From that night on, Emily paid closer attention. She listened more intently. She watched which teachers stayed behind to chat with which parents, which students were mentioned in the staff lounge with enthusiasm, and which ones were dismissed with barely a nod. She started to see patterns. Certain names repeated. Certain families got favored treatment. Certain students, brilliant, kind, deserving, were never mentioned at all. It wasn't just about one exam or one spreadsheet. It was the system itself, a quiet engine of bias running beneath the marble floors and glossy bulletin boards. Emily didn't have a plan, not yet, but she knew something was wrong. And for the first time in her life, she felt a spark not just of wonder, but of purpose. She wasn't just a girl with a mop anymore. She was a witness. And slowly, without meaning to, she had begun to peel back the gilded mask of Park Hill Academy. She didn't know it yet. But that moment, huddled under fluorescent lights, notebook pressed to her chest, storm rattling the glass, was the beginning of everything. The beginning of a truth no one expected a girl with calloused hands and rain-soaked sleeves to ever uncover. It started as a whisper, barely a thought, brushed away like dust. But once you've seen a crack in something that's supposed to be whole, you start to notice more of them. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the spreadsheet, the numbers, the names, the stars beside the undeserving, the omissions beside those who had worked harder than anyone. Her red notebook now carried more than copied poems and algebra formulas. It was slowly becoming something else. A ledger, a record, a trail. At first, she told herself it was just curiosity, that maybe there was an explanation, maybe she had misunderstood. But then she saw the results posted. They were taped to the inside of the counselor's office window, as they were every semester. GPA rankings, scholarship recommendations, upcoming award recipients. Students gathered around it the next morning, buzzing with excitement and envy. Emily stood to the side, cleaning the floor just beyond the double doors, pushing her mop slowly while pretending not to watch. She didn't need to look long. The names were exactly as she remembered them. Avery Dalton, top scholarship slot. Marcus Tran, not even on the list. Marcus, he was her friend, one of the only students who ever talked to her in the library. He never acted like she didn't exist. He'd once asked if she wanted to help him shelve returned books after school. He even taught her how to use the Dewey Decimal System. He was brilliant, soft-spoken, kind, and terrifyingly smart. His debate speech on climate justice had been so powerful that even the faculty had clapped. He was supposed to get that scholarship. Everyone knew it. But there it was, in bold letters, not eligible. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. That night, while the building slumbered and the security cameras blinked with disinterest, Emily returned to the counselor's office. The door was locked, but she didn't need to go inside. She only had to look, carefully, at what was still visible through the window. There, beneath the scholarship criteria sheet, she saw it. A separate document, labeled Adjusted Rankings, Internal Use Only. Adjusted. That word burned into her brain. The next few days became a blur of observation and note-taking. Emily began to track names. Who got praised during assemblies? Who appeared in the weekly newsletters? Which students sat at the front during donor events? She matched them to test papers she found in the trash. Essays forgotten in copy machines. Group projects abandoned in classrooms. She noticed something even more disturbing. The discrepancies weren't random. They favored students with legacy status, kids from families who donated to the school's annual fundraiser, children of board members, real estate developers, or attorneys whose names were etched into marble plaques above the library door. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a system, and every system had an architect. That architect, she learned, was Principal Vaughn. He was always the last to leave. Long after the janitors had swept the final hallway, long after even the night guards had made their final rounds, his office light would stay on, burning alone in the corner tower that overlooked the faculty parking lot. Emily had seen him through the narrow window, hunched over paperwork, sometimes speaking on the phone with the blinds half drawn. At first glance, Principal Vaughn was the embodiment of professional grace. Crisp suits, gleaming cufflinks, a voice like velvet, and an easy smile for every parent. He'd once shaken Emily's father's hand and called him the quiet heart of the school. But Emily had seen the way he spoke to staff behind closed doors. How his smile vanished when he turned away. How he flinched when someone asked too many questions. It was Vaughn who signed off on the final grade entries. Vaughn who submitted the scholarship lists. Vaughn who hosted the gala dinners and smiled for the donor photographs. And Vaughn who had the keys to the locked filing cabinets. Emily's red notebook filled up faster now. She scribbled late into the night, cross-referencing grades she found with names on the award sheets, marking inconsistencies, and noting which students were mysteriously bumped from opportunities despite excelling in their coursework. One day, she stumbled upon a discarded grading rubric near the staff printer. It was a rubric for an English literature project, anonymous, with only a student ID. The scoring was brutal, harsh, no credit for originality. A D+ at the bottom. Hours later, she found the same project in a trash bin outside the faculty lounge. It was incredible. Complex metaphors, a flawless historical tie-in, citations from both classic and modern sources. She recognized the handwriting. Marcus Tran. She stared at the paper until her fingers smudged the ink. Something was deeply broken. Emily no longer felt like a girl playing detective. She felt like she was standing in the middle of a forest fire, watching the trees fall one by one, unable to scream. But she wasn't powerless. She had her notebook. She had her eyes. She had her memory. And most of all, she had time. Time to watch. Time to gather. Time to uncover what the rest of the world was too comfortable to question. So she moved quietly. She memorized teacher routines, who left their folders where, who printed late at night, which passwords were lazily scrawled on sticky notes. She made mental maps of where files were kept, which classrooms had back entrances, and when the security guard took his smoke breaks. She watched Vaughn more closely now. Noticed how he never carried documents from one building to another without a locked briefcase. How he never discussed scholarship matters over email. How he always insisted on paper records. To avoid digital clutter, he'd once said. Emily knew better. Paper trails were easier to hide or burn, but not from her. Every night, her red notebook grew heavier. The lines between right and wrong, truth and power, had begun to blur for everyone else. But not for her. She was the last line, and she was just getting started. The page fell before she realized it was missing. It was just one sheet, torn from the back of her red notebook, folded once and tucked between her sleeve and cleaning cloth. On it, in her small, neat handwriting, were names, GPAs, and 2 question marks in the margin next to the words Avery, 98.5, Jessica, 79. A quiet thought she hadn't meant for anyone to see. A thought that had lived in the shadows with her. Until that day. The council room was empty when she'd entered. It always was around lunch. Teachers and staff too busy with emails and lesson plans to linger. Emily had only meant to wipe down the chairs and gather the empty coffee cups. She liked it here. It smelled of polished wood and expensive paper. The walls were lined with award plaques and framed donor checks, but as she reached to dust a shelf behind the whiteboard, her arm brushed the inside of her sleeve. The page slipped free, light as a whisper, and fluttered to the ground behind the council table. Emily didn't notice. She was already wheeling her cart toward the hallway when the voice stopped her. "Whose is this?" She turned. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Calloway, the math chair. Stern, tall, never smiled. Known for once deducting points from a test because a student's handwriting was erratic, he held the note between 2 fingers like it was evidence in a crime. Emily's heart turned to glass. She froze. She could see, from where she stood, that he hadn't seen her face clearly. Just her uniform, her mop. He likely assumed she was just another staff daughter tagging along. Still, the silence between them stretched like wire. He glanced at the page again, his brow furrowed. "Who wrote this?" Emily said nothing. Mr. Calloway looked around the empty room, as if expecting someone to leap from behind a desk and confess. When no one did, he folded the page and tucked it into his pocket. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Emily stood motionless until the hallway lights flickered once, reminding her to breathe. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She couldn't stop picturing the paper in his hand. Her writing, her thoughts. Out there. She didn't know what he would do with it. Would he throw it away? Show it to the principal? Report it to the board? What if someone tried to trace it? What if he compared it to her other notes? What if he came looking? By the time the sun set, she was shaking. Back in their quarters beside the utility shed, Emily sat curled up against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. The red notebook lay open beside her, pages fluttering from the wind that snuck through the broken window latch. Her father noticed. He'd always noticed. He said softly, crouching beside her. What's going on? Emily didn't answer. Not at first, but after a long silence, she whispered, I dropped something. Something I shouldn't have. He looked at her, eyes narrowing. Did someone hurt you? She shook her head. No, but they might. And then, for the first time, she told him. Bits and pieces, stitched together through trembling lips. About the spreadsheet, the changed grades, the notebook, the night in the lounge. She didn't mention names, but he knew enough. When she finished, he didn't speak for a long time. He just sat beside her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Emily, he said finally, voice low. I know what kind of place this is. I've cleaned its floors for 12 years. I've seen the way they talk when they don't know someone's listening. I've seen how doors open for some and stay shut for others. I know what it's like to be invisible here. She looked at him, tears hot in her eyes. Then why don't we do something? She asked. He sighed. Because the ones with power don't lose easily. They don't fight fair. They rewrite rules, Emily. And if you get caught in their path, they won't care that you're 12. They'll crush you just the same. But it's wrong, she said. Her voice cracked. It's so wrong. I know, he whispered. I know, sweetheart. He turned toward her, taking her hands in his rough, scarred ones. But this fight, it's not safe. You could lose your place here, your future. They could blame me. I don't want to see you get hurt. Emily nodded, but her heart was a storm. She didn't want to hurt anyone, least of all her father. He had sacrificed everything, his time, his dignity, his health, to keep her near books and clean air and opportunity. He had done everything right, but the system didn't care. It didn't care about right or fair. It only cared about control. That night, Emily lay awake on the floor, staring at the peeling ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the school's HVAC system through the wall. She thought about Marcus, about Jessica, about all the students who believed that hard work was enough, that merit was truth, that good grades and good hearts would carry them forward. And she thought about the page now sitting in a stranger's pocket, proof that someone was watching. Her pulse quickened. Maybe she should stop. Maybe it wasn't her place. Maybe it was too dangerous. But then again, maybe she was the only one who could do it. Because no one ever suspects the girl with the mop. It was just an old phone, cracked at the corner, battery fading fast, the camera lens slightly foggy. But to Emily, it was a weapon. She had found it in the lost and found bin behind the gym weeks earlier. No one had claimed it. The screen lit only if you pressed the power button twice and waited. The microphone still worked, though. She had tested it by recording herself reading from her notebook, and when she played it back, her voice was clear, if a little thin. Now, it rested silently inside an empty tissue box she'd cleaned out and repurposed. She lined the inside with a dark sock to cover the lens and cut a pinhole in the front. It was crude, makeshift, but it worked. Emily was ready. She had memorized the schedule. Every Thursday evening, around 6:30 p.m., Principal Vaughn met with Ms. Gentry, the scholarship coordinator, in the small strategy room near the East Wing. It was the only time their meetings weren't held over email or in broad daylight. The room was always locked, but the door didn't seal properly. You could hear faint voices from the janitor's closet next door. She knew because she had listened once before. Now she wanted more than sound. Emily waited for them to arrive. Her heart was a drum. The halls were mostly empty, the lights dimmed to night mode. Her father was in the supply garage, fixing a faulty floor buffer. She had 15 minutes, maybe 20. She placed the tissue box carefully on a high shelf near the back of the meeting room, where the air vent was broken and often used as storage space. She'd propped the door open slightly hours earlier with a thin piece of plastic and watched as it stayed ajar. Then she returned to the closet. Her hands shook as she hit record. What followed changed everything. The phone, angled downward from its hiding place, captured a grainy but clear enough image of the room. Principal Vaughn walked in first, his suit jacket folded over one arm. Ms. Gentry followed, carrying a binder marked Fall Cycle Final Round. They didn't sit. They stood over the table, flipping pages. "I've moved the Monroe girl to Tier 2, Gentry said. Vaughn frowned. The donors already saw her name. They expect her in Tier 1. But her GPA dropped again. No matter. The optics are more important than the scores. Her father gave 60 grand at the last gala. That scholarship was never about merit." Emily leaned closer to the wall. Her chest tightened. Gentry sighed. "And the Tran boy? Drop him to Tier 3. If the board asks, we'll say he declined to submit his final transcript." "That's a lie. A necessary one." A pause. "We're not breaking any laws, Gentry," Vaughn added, his tone cool. "These are internal decisions, strategic adjustments. We're not denying education. We're aligning expectations with institutional support." Emily's breath caught. The meeting continued. They spoke of donor visibility students, of compensatory recalibration, and other phrases Emily couldn't fully decode, but the message was clear. This wasn't about education. It was about image, money, and manipulation. Some students were being handed futures they hadn't earned. Others, better, kinder, sharper, were being pushed aside like unwanted drafts, and no one knew, except her. She let the phone record until the two left. As soon as the door clicked shut, she dashed from the closet, climbed onto the shelf, retrieved the tissue box, and ran, barefoot, breathless, across the staff parking lot, straight to her tiny room beside the boiler house. Her fingers trembled as she played it back. The video was shaky, grainy. The voices echoed slightly. But it was all there. She paused halfway through and stared at her reflection in the blackened screen. 12 years old. No legal training, no allies, no way of knowing what would happen next. But in her hands was a truth too sharp to ignore. She sat for a long time on the cold tile floor, the phone pressed to her chest like a secret too heavy for her ribs. Her thoughts spun like leaves in a storm. What if they found out? What if they took the phone? What if they erased everything? What if they erased her? But then she thought of Marcus, of Jessica, of every page she'd written in her notebook that no one had ever read, of every word she'd copied from chalkboards she wasn't allowed to answer. No one had asked her to do this. No one would. But she was here. She was watching. And now she was ready to be heard. The plan wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished or foolproof. But it was all Emily had. She sat at her makeshift desk, a stack of old crates draped with a frayed towel, staring at the printed photos in front of her. The ink was cheap, the edges curling, but the images were clear enough. Principal Vaughn and Ms. Gentry, mid-conversation, unaware that a 12-year-old girl had turned them into evidence. The words, donor expectation, adjusted GPA, he declined to submit. They echoed like sirens in her ears. Each time she replayed the recording, her stomach twisted tighter. Emily had stayed quiet long enough. It was time. She didn't know how the grown-up world worked, how courts or whistleblower laws or journalism really functioned. But she knew stories. She knew truths had to be seen, not just whispered. And she knew that even in books, when the hero had no voice, the truth found a way to speak for itself. She opened her red notebook and turned to a clean page. Her handwriting was slower this time, more careful. This letter had to matter. It had to sound like someone older, someone credible, but also someone brave. She wrote, "To the teacher who still believes in fairness, you don't know me, but I know you care. There is something happening inside this school. Some students are being pushed aside for money. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it with my own ears. These pictures are real. The recording is real. Please don't ignore this. The truth matters, even when it's buried. Especially then. A friend of the forgotten." She signed it with a single letter. Then she folded the note carefully and clipped it to the printed stills from the video. She placed them in a plain manila envelope and taped it shut. The weight of it felt enormous in her hand. Now came the hard part. Mr. Lowen, the literature teacher, was the one she trusted. He wasn't warm exactly, always serious, sometimes distant. But he spoke to students like they mattered. He gave the janitors a respectful nod every morning. He stayed late to write real feedback on papers. And once, when a student plagiarized a book report, he gave them a second chance instead of public shame. Emily had seen enough to know. This man believed in doing things the right way. His classroom was on the second floor. She waited until just before dawn, when her father was mopping the east hall and the night guard was on his break. She crept up the back stairwell, envelope tucked inside her sweatshirt. The hallway lights buzzed faintly above her. The air smelled of lemon polish and sleep. Mr. Lowen's door was locked, but his filing cabinet wasn't. She knew the second drawer held personal files. She had dusted it enough times to memorize the stickers, one with a quote from Emerson, another from Maya Angelou. She slid the envelope into the drawer, beneath a stack of untouched writing rubrics. Not too deep, not too visible. Just enough to be found if someone was paying attention, and Mr. Lowen paid attention. Emily closed the drawer quietly. Then she ran, but her work wasn't finished. Later that morning, just as the sun began to bleed gold across the cracked pavement of the courtyard, she returned, this time with a small, dented tin box wrapped in plastic. Inside, a USB drive with the full video, a second copy of the printed stills, and a handwritten note identical to the one in Mr. Lowen's drawer. She made her way to the old oak tree behind the science building. It stood alone, weathered and gnarled, its roots thick like the backs of tired hands. She'd sat beneath it before, during breaks, during storms, during quiet moments when the world felt too loud. Now it would guard her secret. Emily dug a small hole beside the base, just under the lowest root. She placed the tin box inside, covered it with dry earth, and packed it firm. Just in case, she whispered to herself. Just in case no one believed her. Just in case Mr. Lowen ignored the letter. Just in case the truth was silenced. This would be her last defense. She stood for a long time, watching the wind rustle the tree's leaves. In that moment, she felt both bigger and smaller than she'd ever been. She wasn't naive. She knew this might not work. She knew she could be caught, that Vaughn had power, that systems like this were built to bury girls like her. But she also knew something else, something fierce and unshakable. She had done something. She hadn't looked away. She hadn't stayed quiet. Emily turned back toward the school building, the gray walls now glowing faintly in the morning light. If everything went wrong, if they came after her or her father or tore apart her notebook page by page, at least she'd know. She hadn't been silent. She had spoken in the only way she knew how. And the truth was no longer just hers to carry. Mr. Lowen nearly tossed the envelope into the recycling bin. It had appeared in his file drawer overnight. No return address, no student handwriting on the outside, just a plain manila envelope tucked too neatly between curriculum rubrics. At first glance, it reeked of prank. This was the same week of the junior scavenger hunt. Students had hidden frog cutouts in the supply closet. One had left a glitter bomb in the band room. It wouldn't have been out of place for a joke to land in his drawer. Still, something about it gave him pause. Maybe it was the weight. Maybe it was the silence it carried. He opened it. Inside was a letter. Typed, precise, direct. And underneath it, a set of low-resolution photo prints, grainy but unmistakable. He recognized the room in the background instantly. Strategy Room 2A. And the two faces? Vaughn, Gentry. Their mouths were mid-sentence. Their postures too casual, too candid for public eyes. He scanned the letter again. Some students are being pushed aside for money. The truth matters, even when it's buried. The voice in the letter wasn't whiny or angry. It was steady, measured, quietly desperate, and far too articulate to be some bored sophomore playing games. Mr. Lowen set the prints down and reached for his laptop. Within 15 minutes, he was looking at the internal scholarship rosters. He found the names. Avery Dalton, Tier 1, full scholarship recommendation. Marcus Tran, Tier 3, not eligible. He remembered both students. Avery's last paper had been barely passable. Marcus's had been quoted in his department meeting for its originality. He checked GPA records, he checked timestamps, and then he sat back in his chair, his jaw slowly tightening. It wasn't just favoritism. It was deliberate, calculated, corrupt. His breath slowed as realization settled over him like cold fog. For years, rumors had floated about Vaughn's obsession with donors, about Gentry's unspoken adjustments, but nothing concrete, nothing worth risking a career over. Until now. Until this. Mr. Lowen didn't waste time. That same morning, during the 7:30 staff briefing, he stood right there in the meeting room and placed the envelope on the table in front of Principal Vaughn. Vaughn looked up from his coffee, amused. "What's this?" "A letter. And evidence," Mr. Lowen replied, arms crossed. "It suggests a serious breach of academic integrity regarding scholarship placement." The room went still. The assistant principal paused mid-sip. Gentry stiffened in her seat. One of the secretaries shifted uncomfortably. Vaughn blinked once, then again, slowly. "I'm sorry, evidence of what?" he asked, tone low, steady. Mr. Lowen kept his gaze even. "Of manipulation, fraud, names being shifted based on donations, not merit." Vaughn's expression didn't change, but the air around him did. "You should be very careful with accusations like that," he said, "especially when they come without context." "I'm only asking for a review," Mr. Lowen replied, "by someone outside this room." Gentry looked away. Vaughn picked up the envelope, flipped it open, and glanced at the photos. His eyes narrowed. He held the paper with practiced calm, but his thumb pressed into the edge of the envelope with force. "This material could have been doctored," he said smoothly. "Do you know where it came from?" "No," Mr. Lowen admitted. "It was anonymous, but the data checks out." "Then I suggest," Vaughn said sharply, "you spend less time reading anonymous mail and more time focusing on your own curriculum. Unless, of course, you'd like to discuss your tenure review." It was a threat, thinly veiled. The room shifted again. Mr. Lowen didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension between them said everything. He collected his binder and walked out, his mind already spinning toward what would come next. By the end of the day, word had spread. Whispers in the copy room, glances in the hallways, faculty members checking and rechecking records on their screens with a kind of nervous energy. Some dismissed it immediately. Others leaned into curiosity. But something had cracked. Something had moved. That week, an internal meeting was called. Not open to students, not on the calendar. The announcement was brief. Review of procedural protocols for scholarship assessment. But no one was fooled. Everyone knew it was about Vaughn, about Gentry, about whatever was in that envelope. Still, the source remained a mystery. No one had seen who delivered the letter. No one had witnessed the envelope being placed. The surveillance footage from the hallway showed nothing. No student matching the time frame. No staff member lingering where they shouldn't have. Emily watched all of it from behind a cart stacked with books. She kept her head down, her steps measured, her presence small. But inside she felt it, the shift, like the faint rumble before a landslide. Like the first drop of water through a ceiling. It had started. They called it an internal review. An email went out to faculty under the subject line, "Clarification of Merit-Based Award Procedures." It used words like transparency, collaboration, institutional trust. The letter was signed by Principal Vaughn himself and assured everyone that the school's leadership team was committed to upholding the highest standards of academic integrity. But behind closed doors, nothing was being reviewed. No teachers were interviewed. No students were questioned. No names were cleared or condemned. Instead, the spreadsheet vanished from the shared drive. The scholarship tiers were removed from public view. And the administrative assistant who had access to the donor lists was suddenly on leave. It was a cleanup, swift, strategic, and silent. Emily watched it unfold from the shadows of her nightly rounds. She saw the locked doors, the faculty avoiding each other's eyes, the way Mr. Lowen's expression darkened by the day. And then Vaughn made his move. A week after Mr. Lowen confronted him, the principal announced a school-wide assembly. "To celebrate the exceptional character and achievement of our student body," he wrote. It was to be held in the grand auditorium, with media invited and a full list of scholarship recipients to be honored on stage. No mention was made of the investigation, no hint that anything had ever been questioned. The banners were printed, the stage was polished, the donor families were sent glossy invites. Students were told to dress semi-formal. The school's reputation, Vaughn seemed determined to prove, remained untarnished. Emily stood at the back of the auditorium that morning, hands clenched in her sweatshirt pockets. As each name was read aloud, each smile rehearsed, each applause cued, she felt a slow burning fire crawl through her chest. Avery Dalton was awarded the highest merit scholarship. Vaughn clapped the longest. Marcus Tran wasn't even called. The audience cheered. Photographers clicked. Donors beamed from their front row seats. The lies were being sealed into polished wood and artificial light. And the truth? The truth had been buried under velvet curtains and PR sound bites. Emily nearly walked away. She spent that afternoon curled up behind the dumpster near the East Building, her notebook tucked beneath her arm, her jaw locked in silent defeat. Maybe her father had been right. Maybe the system was too big. Maybe truth was just a dream kids like her weren't meant to chase. Her tears came hot and quick, hidden behind the clang of metal lids and cafeteria trays. That's when she heard the footsteps. Slow, heavy, familiar? "Didn't think I'd find you here," said the old janitor, Mr. Reyes. He had worked at Park Hill longer than most of the faculty. His back was slightly crooked from years of lifting the unliftable. His voice carried gravel, and his hands were always stained with oil. He sat down beside her without asking. Emily wiped her eyes with her sleeve. He looked at her notebook. "You've been writing more than just notes, huh?" She didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper towel. Inside were 2 peanut butter crackers. He offered them without a word. She took one. "I saw you that night," he said finally. "When you put the envelope in Lowen's drawer. Thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then the meeting happened, and I knew I hadn't." Emily tensed. "I didn't say anything," he added. "Still won't. That's your call." Silence stretched between them. Then he said something that stopped her breath. "You know why Vaughn's scared?" She shook her head. "Because people like him, they build walls, big, fancy ones. But they know, deep down, that all it takes is one brick pulled loose, one truth loud enough, and the whole thing starts to shake." Emily looked up. He nodded toward her notebook. "You're that brick. You already made it wobble." She swallowed hard. "I'm just a kid." "Yeah, and that's exactly why it scares them." He stood slowly, his knees cracking like old wood. "Don't stop now, Nina. If you do, they win." Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the wind, the noise of the school bell, and a fire slowly reigniting in her chest. She looked down at her red notebook. The pages were worn, ink smeared, corners bent, but inside it was something unbreakable. The truth. And this time, she wouldn't whisper it. She'd make sure they heard it. All of them. The night before the biggest parent-teacher conference of the year, the halls of Park Hill Academy were quiet. Eerily so. The school glowed in artificial light as maintenance crews polished floors, rolled out welcome signs, and aligned chairs in the auditorium like soldiers waiting for a verdict. Emily moved through the darkness like a shadow. Her hoodie was too big. Her shoes didn't make a sound. Tucked beneath her arm was a small stack of manila folders, each labeled in careful handwriting. Confidential. Review immediately. Inside each one, she had placed a printout of the full, uncut video recording. Alongside it, a packet of original grade reports and scholarship lists with discrepancies highlighted in red. And finally, the jewel of it all, a clear scan of the page with Principal Vaughn's thumbprint in the corner, next to a name adjustment note in his handwriting. 12 folders, 12 drawers, one truth. She had memorized where each teacher kept their personal cabinet, some under their desks, some behind fake wall panels, others in the faculty lounge where only staff had access. But Emily wasn't just anyone anymore. She was a girl on a mission, and Park Hill, for all its prestige, had never been designed to defend itself against someone who knew its cracks better than it knew its marble. By the time the sun rose, the folders were in place. She left no name, no trace, only truth. And then she waited. The parent-teacher conference began like any other. Mothers in heels, fathers with clipboards, students trailing behind with nervous smiles. Teachers stood by tables, faces stiff from rehearsed warmth. Vaughn made his rounds, shaking hands, offering tight-lipped nods, a model of control, until the first folder was opened. It happened in room 3C, where Mr. Lowen taught literature. He found the envelope beneath his lesson plans and froze when he saw the cover. Then, quietly, he opened it. His face drained of color. 5 minutes later, another teacher found hers, Mrs. Nakamura, Science Department, then Mr. Blaine in Social Studies. One by one, a current of confusion swept through the faculty lounge. Whispers grew into murmurs, and murmurs into silence. Teachers began gathering in the hallway, huddled over copies of the same packet, reading, scanning, pointing to signatures and GPA columns, to comments like adjust placement per donor note and, confirmed by Vaughn, print final copy. In the front office, a secretary tried calling the principal's line. He didn't answer. Meanwhile, parents were taking their seats in the main auditorium, waiting for the awards and merit recognition segment scheduled to begin. The podium was set. The lights were ready. And then the first voice spoke up. "Where's Marcus Tran's name?" asked his mother from the third row, holding the latest newsletter. No one had an answer. Another parent stood. "Can someone explain why these documents don't match the school's published results?" The murmur began to ripple. Mr. Lowen, folder still in hand, stepped forward from the staff seating area. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "These documents," he said, "show evidence of grade tampering and unethical scholarship assignments. They were placed in our hands anonymously, but their contents are verifiable, and they are serious." Vaughn entered the room at that moment, shoulders squared, tie straight, smile in place, until he saw the folders, and the expressions, and the silence. One parent stepped into the aisle, holding the printout of the GPA list. "Did you sign off on this?" she asked. Vaughn's eyes scanned the page, slowly, too slowly. "I don't know what this is," he said, his voice perfectly measured. "It looks like a fabrication. We've had several cybersecurity incidents recently. These could be doctored." "Your fingerprint is on one of them," said Mrs. Nakamura, holding up the scan. Someone gasped. Another voice shouted from the back, "My daughter was dropped from Tier 1 last minute without explanation. You said her grades weren't high enough." A father stood next to her. "My son got the scholarship, but we never even applied." And then the room broke. Parents shouted over each other. Students began to cry. Teachers tried to calm the crowd, but the storm had started. Years of quiet inequality, favoritism, manipulation, all now laid bare in printed text and shaky video stills. And through it all, Emily watched from the service hallway behind the stage curtain, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't triumphant. She was trembling, but she was also standing tall. For the first time, truth had a voice in that auditorium, and it wasn't holding a microphone. It was pulsing through every parent's rising anger. It was echoing in every teacher's shaken disbelief. It was too late to cover it up. The confrontation had begun. It was the handwriting that gave her away. Amid the chaos that followed the parent-teacher confrontation, when folders were being passed around like wildfire and teachers whispered behind closed doors, Mr. Lowen sat alone at his desk, staring at the letter again. The one that started it all. He had read it dozens of times by now, memorized its rhythm, its restraint, its quiet defiance. But it was the scribbled margin notes on one of the documents that caught his attention this time. Curved E's, tiny, deliberate loops, a slight tilt to the left. He had seen that before, on the back of abandoned worksheets, on forgotten poetry drafts, on paper towels left beside the library window, always beside the same tattered red notebook. It had belonged to the janitor's daughter, Emily, the quiet one, the invisible one, the girl who cleaned whiteboards long after everyone had gone home, the one nobody saw, until now. The next morning, while students buzzed with rumors and parents demanded meetings with the board, Mr. Lowen walked the dim hallway toward the custodial quarters. His shoes echoed on the linoleum like questions that wouldn't stop. He knocked gently on the metal door. Emily opened it halfway. She didn't look surprised to see him. He held up the notebook he'd found tucked under a stack of returned books. "I believe this is yours." She didn't speak, didn't nod. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Emily," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The meeting with the board was hastily organized. Not public, not yet. But the tension in the room was razor sharp. The assistant principal, 2 teachers, the school counselor, and Principal Vaughn himself sat behind a long desk like a tribunal. Emily sat alone on the other side, her red notebook folded tightly in her hands. Her father had begged her not to go. "Let the adults handle it now," he'd said. "You've done enough." But Emily knew better. She had started this, not to destroy, but to correct. And if she stayed silent now, the story might be rewritten by someone else. "Emily," began the assistant principal, her voice as soft as a blade under velvet. "We've reviewed some documents that seem to have originated from you." Emily looked up. "Yes, I left them." Vaughn shifted in his seat. "We'd like to understand how you came across this information," said one of the board members. "How it was gathered, and why." Her fingers gripped the notebook tighter. Then, with a breath that seemed to reach all the way back to the night she first opened that spreadsheet, she spoke. She told them about the late nights, the overheard conversations, the mismatched grades, the tissue box camera, the buried copy under the oak tree. She spoke clearly, slowly. Her voice didn't tremble. She showed them pages from her notebook, cross-referenced notes, copied GPA columns, fingerprint scans, phrases from the video she had transcribed by hand. She showed them everything. No one interrupted her. No one dared. When she was done, the room sat in stunned silence. Then Vaughn cleared his throat. "With all due respect, we're talking about the unsupervised actions of a child. A child who exposed a broken system," Mr. Lowen cut in from the back of the room. "Something the rest of us should have seen long ago." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She had spoken the truth in a room built to silence it. And that made her, for the first time, visible. It wasn't supposed to be recorded. The meeting had been private, quiet, hidden in the back office of the administration wing, far from the noise of classrooms and the eyes of the public. But when Emily walked out of that room, red notebook clutched tight against her chest. One teacher who had stood in the hallway, quietly listening, pulled out their phone. They had filmed only a minute of her statement. A few quiet lines. One clear sentence. "I'm 12, and I was never supposed to see any of this. But I did. And you can't pretend it didn't happen." That video hit the local parent group's Facebook page by 3 p.m. By 6 p.m., it was trending on regional Twitter. By midnight, it was on the front page of the Austin Tribune. The comments came fast, furious, and unrelenting. "She's 12 and has more integrity than most adults." This is what happens when no one is watching, except the girl who's always been ignored. Park Hill's elite reputation just fell apart, and it took a mop bucket and a notebook to do it. Within 24 hours, the story was picked up by 2 national education blogs and a local affiliate station. By 48, it had reached a morning talk show. They didn't have Emily's name, yet, but they had the story. The whiteboard girl, they called her. The student who wasn't a student. The janitor's daughter who rewrote the system. Outside the school gates, news vans parked bumper to bumper. Cameras flashed from sidewalks. Reporters swarmed faculty with questions no one was ready to answer. The board met behind closed doors again. This time, it wasn't Emily they were questioning. It was Principal Vaughn. They reviewed the video footage, the documents, the fingerprint scan, the still frames from the tissue box camera, now verified by a third-party tech consultant. They listened to recorded interviews from teachers, read emails flagged by the district's IT team that had surfaced corrections made to student records weeks after final submission deadlines. And then the decision came. Effective immediately, Vaughn was placed on administrative leave, pending a formal ethics investigation. Ms. Gentry, too. All scholarship disbursements were frozen. An independent audit would be conducted within the month. The announcement hit the press like a thunderclap. Park Hill's pristine image cracked wide open. And standing at the center of it all was Emily. She didn't know what to do with the attention. Her father pulled her out of school the next morning and refused to let her leave the apartment. He was terrified, not of the truth, but of what people did with it. "They're not all kind," he warned her. "They smile for the cameras, and then they dig until you disappear." But Emily wasn't afraid. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, numb from all the noise, but not afraid. What scared her most, what had always scared her, was silence. The kind that lets things rot, that covers broken things in gold leaf and calls it tradition, that tells girls who mop whiteboards to keep their heads down and just be grateful. And now the silence was broken. She watched the news reports with quiet disbelief, saw her words quoted beside shots of polished classrooms and angry parent interviews, read editorials calling her a symbol of moral courage, while others questioned how a child was even allowed to access such sensitive material. She was invited to speak, to be interviewed, to tell her side of the story on morning news panels. She said no to all of it. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted things to change, and slowly they did. An emergency board committee was formed, this time with outside oversight. Several donors demanded transparency before issuing further contributions. A group of parents launched a petition calling for protections for whistleblowers, even student ones. A local law firm offered pro bono representation to her family should retaliation arise. And Emily went back to wiping boards. Not because she had to, because she chose to. She walked the same halls, pushing the same mop, wearing the same scuffed shoes. But this time, people saw her, and no one, no matter how polished, how powerful, how well-dressed, could pretend otherwise. The truth had a face now, and her name was Emily. The envelope arrived 2 weeks after the storm broke. It wasn't marked with a school crest or a return address, just a small, clean label in the upper left corner. Everbright Education Foundation. Emily's father opened the mailbox and held it in his hands like something fragile. When he gave it to her, he said nothing, just waited. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, ivory, formal. At the top, printed in gold, Full Academic Fellowship Award, from primary through doctorate-level study. Emily stared at it for a long time, not quite believing it. The words didn't sparkle. They weren't dramatic, but they meant everything. Not just a scholarship, a future where she wouldn't have to sneak into classrooms after hours, where her learning wouldn't come from forgotten pages and erased chalkboards, where someone, somewhere, had looked at a 12-year-old girl with a mop and said, "She deserves to learn. Let's make sure she can." The offer came with a letter. "Dear Emily, courage like yours does not just expose what is broken. It reminds the world what must be built instead. Please accept this fellowship as a small acknowledgement of the light you've brought into the places others left dark. We are not only proud of you, we believe in you." She read it 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. Across the room, her father had tears in his eyes, but Emily just smiled. Not because it was over, but because for the first time, something real had begun. The interview requests kept coming. Morning shows, education blogs, national columns. They wanted exclusives, sit-downs, photo ops beside the red notebook. Producers offered car rides and hotel stays. Reporters promised exposure. Some even offered payment. Emily declined them all. She wasn't looking to be a headline, or a brand, or anyone's symbol. She gave one statement, just one. It was handwritten on lined paper and delivered to the Tribune by mail. "I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be seen. Not because I was loud, but because I had something to say. I don't want praise. I don't want credit. I just want a school where the truth isn't punished, where grades are earned, where no one has to clean in the dark just to learn in the light. I just want a fair education, that's all." It was published in full, no edits, and for a few rare hours the internet agreed. 1 week later, Park Hill held its first all-school assembly since the scandal. It wasn't about scholarships or awards this time. It was about healing. The auditorium was packed. Students, parents, faculty, alumni. They sat shoulder to shoulder, unsure what the morning would bring. The air buzzed, not with celebration, but with reckoning. Emily stood backstage, She wasn't scheduled to speak. She didn't want to, but the board insisted on honoring her. And this time, she hadn't said no. She stood in the wings beside her father, hands fidgeting nervously in the sleeves of a borrowed sweater. Her name was whispered through the audience like a breeze rising before a storm. And then, they called him. Not her. Him. We'd like to begin by recognizing someone who, for years, held up this school when no one was watching. Who worked through the nights, through broken pipes and heavy snow. Who raised a daughter not just to clean the truth, but to speak it. Mr. Alvaro Sanchez, please come forward. Emily's father froze. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, slowly, awkwardly, he stepped onto the stage, tool belt still hanging from his waist, uniform sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked out over the crowd, blinking under the lights, and the school rose to their feet. Students, teachers, even the board, they clapped. They clapped louder than they had for any donor, any graduate, any polished administrator. They clapped for the man who had scrubbed their cafeteria floors and fixed their boilers. They clapped for the father of the girl who saved the soul of their school. Emily stood in the wings, her throat tight, her eyes burning. For 12 years, she had watched this man go unnoticed. Now the world couldn't look away. Later, as they walked home together under a sky full of soft spring light, he said, "You know what the best part of today was?" She glanced up at him. It wasn't the applause. She smiled faintly. Then what? It was seeing you finally sit in the front row, where you've always belonged. And this time, Emily didn't say anything. She just held his hand, tightly, like a promise. They drove in silence for most of the way. The road out of Austin bent through quiet neighborhoods and into the dry hills, where old oaks leaned toward cracked sidewalks like sentinels of memory. Emily sat in the passenger seat, the windows half down, letting the wind tangle her hair. Her father's hands gripped the steering wheel gently but firmly, like someone holding on to something he once lost. When they turned onto the gravel drive, she saw it. The school wasn't much, just a squat red brick building nestled between two fields of wild grass. One basketball hoop stood crooked. The windows had wire mesh still nailed across the lower halves. The paint had peeled off the doors in long, curling strips. Her father stepped out of the truck without a word. Emily followed. "This was it," he said. "Escuela San Mateo." She looked around. It was small, smaller than she imagined. A place built for fewer dreams than it denied. "They turned you away here?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Third time we tried. My mother begged. I had good grades too, but no shoes, and no money for uniforms." Emily swallowed. "And you never tried again?" He smiled sadly. "Not here." They walked slowly through the overgrown courtyard. Rusted swings creaked in the breeze. The sky above them was a muted blue, the sun hanging low behind clouds like a secret too heavy to rise. Near the edge of the field stood an old oak tree. She paused. "You said this was where you used to come," she said. He looked at the gnarled branches, the thick roots stretching like veins beneath the dirt. "Yeah, used to hide behind it. Watch the other kids play. Pretend I belonged here." Emily placed her palm gently against the bark. This tree reminded her of another, the one behind Park Hill, the one she had buried the truth beneath. She wondered how many stories trees had heard that no one ever told. Her father took a step closer and sat on the root beside her. "I wanted to burn this place down when I was your age," he said with a quiet laugh. "Thought maybe if I erased it, the memory would hurt less." Emily sat beside him. "But I didn't," he added. "I just grew up, got quiet, told myself that's how the world worked." She turned to him, eyes searching. "Do you still believe that?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something she hadn't seen in years. His old work ID from when he first got hired at Park Hill. The photo was faded, the corners bent. "I spent my whole life walking around with my head down," he said. "Just trying not to be noticed. Just trying not to cause trouble." Then he looked at her. "And then you came along, with your notebook, and your questions, and you didn't back down, even when I begged you to." Emily blinked, the wind brushing her cheek like a breath held too long. He smiled, and there was something raw in it. like sunlight breaking through scar tissue. "I'm proud of you, Mia," he said. "You did something I couldn't." She didn't answer, not with words. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. For a long time, they sat in silence beneath that old oak. A man who had once been told he wasn't enough, and a girl who had once believed no one would ever listen to her. 2 generations, one scarred by silence, one brave enough to speak. Somewhere, in the quiet between them, something long buried began to heal. Not just memory, not just the past, but a promise that cycles could be broken, that stories could be rewritten, that the next time a child like her knocked on a closed door, someone would open it. The ceremony was small, quiet, no streamers or confetti, no grand speeches or red carpets, but it was permanent. The plaque had already been mounted when Emily arrived, set into the stone just beside the glass double doors of the newly renovated library wing. The letters shimmered under the morning sun, carved deep, as if daring time to erase them. The Emily Sanchez Library, dedicated to the one who wiped away the surface and revealed the truth beneath. Emily stood before it with her father, her hand tightening around the strap of her book bag. There weren't many people there, just a few students, a handful of teachers, and a small group of school board members who now wore guilt and admiration in equal measure. But it was enough. Enough to mark a shift. Enough to tell the next girl pushing a mop cart that someone like her had stood here before and changed everything. The librarian unlocked the door and gently waved her in. It smelled like fresh paint and oak shelves. The floors gleamed. The windows stretched high, letting in morning light that spilled like possibility across the reading tables. And right at the entrance, beneath a wall of framed book covers, was a simple wooden bench. On it, a plaque even smaller than the one outside. But its words were bolder than anything Emily had ever read in any textbook. "For the girl who once cleaned our boards, but rewrote our story." She ran her fingers across the engraving, breath caught between pride and disbelief. Behind her, the new librarian whispered, "We've added your red notebook to the glass case near the entrance. Would you like to see it?" Emily turned. Inside the case, beneath a soft spotlight, rested her old, battered notebook, the corners still bent, the pages yellowed with time and ink. It sat beside a copy of the whistleblower letter, a photo of the oak tree where she had buried the truth, and a still image from the video that had shattered the silence. No fanfare, no filter, just evidence, proof that a child no one saw had dared to look deeper. As she stood there, a small group of younger students filtered into the room, laughing, tugging at each other's sleeves. They passed her without realizing who she was, and that felt right. She didn't want reverence. She wanted them to be free to learn, to ask questions, to write without fear. And that's when the bell rang. Her first official class, not as a shadow, not as a janitor's daughter, but as a student. She walked through the hallway slowly, her fingers grazing the lockers. Everything looked the same. Same walls, same bulletin boards, same smells of dry erase markers and forgotten lunches. But it felt different now. She was different. She reached her classroom, took a breath, and stepped inside. No one looked up. No one stared. The teacher smiled and gestured to an empty seat near the window. She sat down and took out a pen. This time, she wasn't there to clean someone else's lesson. She was there to write her own. Out the window, the courtyard stretched wide, sunlight pooling across the benches, the trees, and the statue in the distance, the one that now bore her name. She thought about the nights she had spent sweeping this very floor, about the questions she had buried like treasure under piles of erased equations, about the silence that had once swallowed her voice whole. And then she opened her notebook, a new one, blank, clean, waiting. She wrote only one sentence on the first page. Truth doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the one brave enough to speak it. The camera panned back slowly, through the classroom door, down the corridor, past the framed honors and golden trophies, and finally settled on the library again. Still, solid, a monument not to success, but to courage. And as the light poured through the windows, a soft voice echoed. She was just the girl who wiped the board, but what she left behind changed everything.